Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. We're so happy you all could join us in our streaming service today. Our service is brought to you today by Reverend Kevin, who is unfortunately unable to join us in person today, but he will be here via video in a bit. Myself and Andrew White, who is providing our critical tech support. Just a word about the people providing the tech support. I come from a background of broadcasting, and if this were the regular sort of situation, you'd have 6 or 7 people doing what either Andrew or Daniel do on their own. So keep that in mind and be sure to thank them for all their efforts when you have an opportunity. If you're able to, please sign in to the chat area over here so we have an idea who's joining us today. If you have a joy or concern to share today, but have not yet emailed the worship team, please take a moment to share in the chat area so we can light a candle for you during joys and concerns. Please note whether your item is a joy or a concern. It's come to our attention that some of the people joining us for these services are brand new folks, people who have not been able to come to services in person as of yet. First, welcome to all of you. We're glad you've joined us this morning. If you'd like more information about our community, to talk to someone from the church, or would like to join our email list, I would encourage you to either contact the church office, or you can find information on our website at idahofallsuu.org. And while it's obvious we cannot pass the plate this morning, it's still important to financially support our church. Please don't forget we still have bills to pay. Donations can be mailed to our post office box or contributed online through our website. All donations are gratefully accepted. To begin our change into the formal part of our service today, I'm going to read the Peace Bowl, ring the Peace Bowl. Breathing has long been recognized as a key to our mental state. Anxiety, fear, anger can all be controlled and mitigated through our conscious awareness of our breathing. I would ask you to become aware of your own breathing. And while I ring the Peace Bowl, focus on steady, deep breaths. As you breathe, try to mentally focus on being present, here and now, and open to the experience. Let your usually daily concerns quiet themselves and allow yourself the luxury of calm attention. Join us now, if you will, with the reading of our covenant. You should find that in the order of service. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. For our chalice lighting this morning, I've chosen a passage from Thich Nhat Hanh's Miracle of Mindfulness. People usually consider walking on water or in thin air a miracle. But I think the real miracle is not to walk on water or in thin air, but to walk on earth. Every day we are engaged in a miracle which we don't even recognize. A blue sky, white clouds, green leaves, in the curious eyes of a child, our own two eyes, all a miracle. Please join us now and enjoy our prelude. Please join us now as Reverend Kevin leads us in a call to worship.
Good morning. As you can see by the background, I'm joining you remotely this morning because my lower back has been bothering me for a few days. I am feeling better, but standing is still uncomfortable after a few minutes. I hope to be back in the pulpit next week. Our call to worship today comes from the UN Environmental Sabbath program. We join with the earth and with each other to bring new life to the land, to restore the waters, to refresh the air. We join with the earth and with each other to renew the forest, to care for the plants, to protect the creatures. We join with the earth and with each other to celebrate the seas, to rejoice in the sunlight, to sing the song of the stars. We join with the earth and with each other to recreate the human community, to promote justice and peace, to remember our children. We join with the earth and with each other. We join together as many and diverse expressions of one loving mystery for the healing of the earth and the renewal of all life. I invite you to join in our opening hymn, number 58, Ring Out Wild Bells.
Today's Time for All Ages is The Banyan Deer, a parable of courage and compassion by Rafe Martin. It's an adaptation of an older story, a Jataka tale from India, a tale of the Buddha before he was the Buddha. "Mother," said the young deer, "is that King Banyan?" "Yes, child, that is the king. His likeness was carved atop this stone pillar by order of a human king. And the story of this pillar is the story of how you were born." "Me? My birth? Oh, please tell me the story." "That is why I brought you here. You are old enough now. We stand in the very spot it all took place. It was like this. Back when I still carried you within my body, before you were born, that same human king I mentioned loved to hunt." "What did he hunt?" asked the young deer. "He hunted animals, living creatures like us," answered his mother. "Like us? But why?" "He liked the chase, and he liked to eat meat." "Meat?" "Our bodies." "Oh," said the young deer with a shudder. "Yes, the king loved to hunt. But the shopkeepers, teachers, wheelwrights, potters, tailors, carpenters, and farmers of his kingdom were not happy about it. Not at all. For the king made all his subjects join him. He insisted that they help drive the forest animals toward his huntsmen's bows. Because of this, fields lay idle. Children were not well schooled. The potter's clay was not dug. Tailors didn't cut and sew. Homes stood half built. And so people decided to take matters into their own hands. To solve their problem, they joined together and built a stockade deep in the forest. Then they drove 2 herds of deer inside. "Now," they said, "the king won't need us for his hunts. He can hunt whenever he wants, to his heart's content, and we can get back to our lives and work." "And one of those herds was our herd?" asked the young deer. "And the banyan deer was our king?" "Yes, one of those herds was our herd. But the banyan deer was not our king. Not then. He was the leader of the other herd." "Oh," said the fawn with disappointment and confusion. "But isn't he our king?" Don't be sad, said the doe. You're right. He is our king now. Listen to the story and you'll soon see for yourself what happened. All right? The fawn nodded, and so his mother went on. The stockade gate was locked when the human king arrived. He climbed the steps to the top of the wall, looked down, and sighed. How I will miss the glorious chase and the excitement of the hunt. But yes, the people must have their lives. I will only shoot the deer in the stockade. You may all go back to your homes. Only my hunters need remain. Then he added, Those 2 deer kings, the leaders of the herds, are both magnificent animals. No one is to shoot them. The people went home. The hunters shot a deer for the king's kitchen. And to the king and his people, all seemed well. But actually it was not for us deer. Many were wounded by flying arrows. Many more were injured in the mad rush to escape the hunters' arrows. And each day one of us was killed. Every day it was the same. The archers drew their bows, and the stockade erupted in panic and chaos, each deer scrambling for safety. But there was no safety. And each day another deer was carried off to the king's kitchen, while many other deer were hurt, just trying to escape, just trying to stay alive. One day the banyan deer went to the leader of our herd. Brother, he said, shaking his noble, antlered head, I have searched everywhere, tried every exit, but there is no escape. So for the sake of our herd, let us hold a lottery. One day a deer from my herd will be selected by lot to stand before the huntsman, and the next day a deer from yours. In this way, each day only 1 deer will be shot, and no others will be injured. It is a terrible solution, but at least in this way we can end our people's suffering. And our king agreed. The next day, when the human king and his bowmen came and stood atop the stockade wall, they found 1 trembling deer standing there, all alone. The human king said, Those deer kings are wise. They have found a way to help their people. I saw his face when he said it. Remember, I myself was there. And the human king looked troubled. Then just 1 arrow flew, and just 1 deer was killed. But no other deer were injured. And for many days that is how it went. Each day 1 deer died, and the rest were safe. Then one day the lot fell to a doe who was soon to give birth. Was that you, mother? Asked the young deer. Yes, she answered, looking down tenderly at him. It was, and the child I carried was you. But it wasn't right. The terms of the lottery were clear. Only 1 was supposed to die. I went to my king and said, Great king, the lot has fallen on me, but I am now with child. Once my fawn is born and able to live on its own, I will go willingly and take my place before the huntsman. But if I go now, both I and my unborn fawn will die. The lottery claims only 1 life at a time. Please spare my child. But my king said, It's impossible. There can be no exceptions. The law is the law. The lottery fell on you, so now you must die. That was hard-hearted, said the young deer, pawing the ground with his hoof. He had been spared from the hunt and was never in any danger of losing his life. He should have spoken more kindly. Yes, that was my thought too, said his mother, but I was not ready to give up yet. Instead, I ran to the banyan deer and told him of my troubles. You are right, said the great being. You must wait until your fawn is born and strong enough to survive on its own. Go and be at peace. Another shall take your place. Grateful beyond measure, I bounded away, but it was not just any deer who would die in my place. No, it was the banyan deer king himself who now walked to where the hunters waited. I had not understood that he intended to offer himself. But after all, how could he ask anyone else to make such a sacrifice? He had freed me. Now he alone would take my place. That was very brave. He is a great king, said the young deer. The greatest, agreed the doe. When I realized what he intended, I felt terrible. I hadn't meant for the king to die, so I followed at a distance to watch what happened. Here is what I saw. When the hunters looked down, bows at the ready, they were shocked to see the great banyan deer himself standing below. Great, get the king, they called. When the human king came, the hunters said, Sire, look! The king looked. "Banyan Deer King," he called in surprise, "why have you come? You know I have spared you from my hunt. Go now and send another in your place." "I cannot go. I have come here to take the place of a doe with a fawn," said Great Banyan. "The lottery fell on her, but it is not right that two should die when our lottery only demands one. So I have taken her place." The human king was amazed. "What?" he exclaimed. "You would give your own life to save another?" "I would, great king. I shall." The human king was visibly shocked. He tugged at his beard and stared down at our noble banyan deer for a long, long time. Then at last he said, "Great Banyan Deer, this is a noble lesson. A king must care for the least of his subjects. I should learn from you. Such caring has not been my strength. So in payment to you of a teacher's fee, I offer you a special gift. You and your herd can go free. Take your people and go live in peace. From this day forth you are all spared from my hunt." And the great deer only shook his head. "O king of men, I cannot go. What of the other herd? If my herd and I now leave, they will only suffer all the more, will they not? Day in and day out, that your arrows will only fall on them. What's more, the doe with fawn that I came here to save is in that herd. She and her unborn fawn would soon die once my herd and I left. What would be the point of buying our freedom at such a cost? How can I be free unless the other herd is free too?" Seeing all this from my place of safety, I was stunned and filled with hope. My heart leaped with such fierce joy that the human king seemed astounded too. Again he tugged his beard and stared down speechlessly into the stockade. So then he said, "So, you would actually risk your safety and that of your herd for this other herd, though they are none of your own?" "I would, great king," said the banyan deer. "I shall." "This is a great lesson indeed," admitted the human king. "Very great." He sighed deeply. "Then so shall it be. Go now and live in peace, for I shall free the other herd as well." But the banyan deer did not leave. "Too long have I lived with danger to let it fall so heavily on others now. All the other four-footed animals of the forest, and the winged birds, and the fish that swim will suffer terribly if I leave. They will be hunted without limit or mercy. How can I abandon them and be at peace with myself, knowing that my freedom was bought at such a price? I know the terrors of the hunt. I, too, have lived in the midst of that fear. Free them as well, great king. If you really mean for me to be happy and at peace, it is the only way." The king hung his head and pondered. Again he sighed. "It seems you are determined to make crop farmers of us all. But I see your point. The wisdom of your words is clear. If you go, others will suffer all the more. So what can I do? All the other animals and the birds and the fish shall be freed from my hunt as well. So go and live in peace, great Banyan King." The end.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The importance of community at this point in our history can hardly be overstated. Our joys and concerns offer a time for all of us to share moments of hope, joy, happiness, pain, loss, or disappointment. As Andrew reads your shared hope or concern, I'll light a candle on your behalf. I'd like to start off by lighting a candle for Reverend Kevin in hopes for a speedy recovery from his current back issues.
So we have a concern from Nancy and Larry Frank. We just learned that the Alabama family of Pastor Laura Bardo of the local chapel in Swan Valley has COVID. Also, stepdaughter of a prominent Idaho Falls attorney who lives out near them is very ill. And it really hits home when it's the family of people that you know, and that is true. We have a joy from Alice McTwisp, who says she's here, she's glad to be here, and her joy is that she has a home and found a foster for her familiars. Molly Brinkerhoff has a great joy. Molly's son William and his partner Nicole are engaged. So congratulations to them. And lastly, Bill and Cindy Miller, a joy. Their son and his wife, both of whom are first responders, just got the second dose of the COVID vaccine this week, and that is excellent. And that is all of the joys and concerns at this moment.
I'll light one more candle for all the joys and concerns we all continue to hold in our hearts and are not ready to share at this time. Now we'll enjoy a reading from Reverend Kevin.
Our reading today is an excerpt from the book Buddhism and Ecology by Daniel H. Henning. The immortal naturalist Charles Darwin hiked with a friend through the English countryside. "There is an abundance of clover here," observed Darwin. "This district must have many widows." The two strolled on, Darwin enjoying the country air, his friend lost in deep contemplation. At last, the friend tugged the great scientist's sleeve. "What has clover to do with widows?" he asked. Darwin smiled and explained. "An abundance of clover needs many healthy swarms of bees to pollinate it. Thriving beehives mean there are few rats to raid and ravage them. A scarcity of rats spells an abundance of cats. Who keeps and feeds packs of cats? Widows, of course." Darwin, who shook Christendom with his discoveries, would have made a good Buddhist. He understood and explained to the Western world the interconnectedness of nature's realm. Centuries before Darwin, sages of the Orient found this truth self-evident. They knew nature to be part of humanity, and humanity a part of nature. If we were together in person this morning, we would likely be doing a burning bowl ritual or something else to highlight this time of transition, the death of the old year and the birth of the new. But of course, we are still contending with the pandemic that arrived in early 2020. And the past year has been so difficult and tumultuous anyway that we would probably need a bonfire to put it behind us. So in this winter season, as the earth lays fallow and the nights are long and cold, I thought it would be nice to give a series of sermons that explores the idea of green spirituality, how environmental ethics and ecological thinking has been expressed within various religious traditions, both historically and in their modern form. Just think of these sermons as miracle evergreen boughs offered with the promise that spring will indeed return and the earth will again become verdant and filled with new life. My sermon series will be in 3 parts, beginning today with a look at Eastern traditions. The second part next week will focus on the 3 Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the third part, on January 31st, will focus on the contemporary religion of nature known as religious naturalism. Let me say up front that I do not want to suggest that the order I chose is based on some sense of triumphalism, that the green spirituality of the Abrahamic faiths is better than that of Eastern counterparts, or that religious naturalism is superior to all the others. I think there is green spiritual food for the picking, no matter what spiritual path you find most appealing. And I wanted to shed light on some possibilities you may wish to explore further. I did intentionally choose religious naturalism to be the third part because it represents the most recent scientific approach to nature spirituality, and it has been influenced by many older traditions that stretch back into the centuries. And given the current state of the world, with dark days in the forecast due to COVID-19, it is perhaps most appropriate that we begin today with a look at Eastern traditions. One reason is because a central idea that several Eastern religions share is that life is dukkha, a Sanskrit word which means suffering or struggling. A second reason is that cycles of death and rebirth are another common idea, and this fits nicely with the spirit of the New Year's celebration. But before I dig into the Eastern religions specifically, let me say a few words about why I think it is important to see what green spiritual wisdom the ancient religious traditions have to offer in general. It is true that many of the environmental issues we face today can be traced to relatively recent human activity and technologies that were never dreamed of in ancient times when these religions emerged. Furthermore, when you look at the creation myths of these traditions and the scientific knowledge available to their earliest adherents, it is easy to be skeptical that they have much to offer at all for the modern seeker in her time of need. We are still human beings, though, and we share the same biological relationship with the earth as our ancient forebears, even if our perspectives have shifted over time and our technology allows most of us to live in less fear of the natural world. While it is still doubtful that sacred texts and practices of any religious tradition will offer specific practical solutions to issues such as climate change or mass extinction, religion has always had much to say about the fundamental relationship between humanity and the physical world, and the relationship of both to the sacred or ultimate reality. I would also argue that any wisdom that has withstood the evolution that all religions undergo over time is at least worthy of consideration. Let me also say that one sermon, or even a full year of sermons, offers too little time to speak about green spirituality within all the varieties of Eastern religions that have emerged over the millennia. So I do have to narrow my focus quite a bit. It is difficult to speak in generalities about even one tradition, such as Hinduism, which comes in many varieties already, let alone combined with Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Shinto, and many other smaller religions that often blend elements of the others. Some are atheistic, while others embrace a single divine entity, or even millions of spirits and deities. Many share the concept of karma and see time as circular, with cycles of rebirth, while others focus only on the present world and this lifetime. It is also complicated to speak of how these religions are practiced in the East, because unlike in the West, where people generally identify with a singular faith such as Catholic or Methodist or Unitarian Universalist, it is more common in the East to see a more syncretic approach. Someone in Japan, for example, may have a Shinto wedding and a Buddhist funeral, or someone in China may feel a strong cultural affinity for the Confucian concept of right relationships, but make pilgrimages to Taoist shrines and practice Buddhist meditation on the side. What we can say is generally true about Eastern traditions, which is most relevant to the idea of green spirituality, is that they value harmony between the human, the earth, and the sacred. It is helpful to imagine a triangle connecting points representing the human, the earth, and the sacred in sacred tension. Striking the right balance by whatever actions we take is the goal, keeping the poles in harmony. When we act otherwise, and the balance is disturbed, that is when we get into trouble. The details of the doctrines and practicing surrounding this basic premise are what differentiates the particular traditions. Speaking specifically about Japanese religion, the historian H. Byron Earhart summarizes how this differs from most Western theology, writing, "The tendency of Judeo-Christian theology is to think of a hierarchy with God first, human beings second, and nature a poor third. In Japanese religion, the three are more nearly equal terms. Mortals, gods, and nature form a triangle of harmonious relationships." Today I will speak mostly about green spirituality within Buddhism and a little about Taoism, because I believe these are most relevant to contemporary UU seekers. In fact, about a quarter of all UUs these days identify as Buddhist in some form, and many others, me included, find the spirituality of Buddhism and Taoism very appealing and relevant. So first, some background. The religious traditions of the East emerged within the civilizations that developed along the great river valleys, namely the Indus River of the Indian subcontinent and the Yangtze River in China. Taoism is believed to have begun in China around 600 BCE, and with the teachings of the sage Lao Tzu recorded in the sacred text, the Tao Te Ching. But the historicity of Lao Tzu is uncertain. The oldest copy of the Tao Te Ching discovered so far dates to around 300 BCE. Hinduism is believed to have emerged in a recognizable form around 4,000 years ago, coming out of the earlier Vedic traditions that venerated the thunder and rain god Indra and the fire god Agni as principal deities. Both were incorporated into traditional Hindu beliefs. Buddhism emerged from this lineage in the northeastern region of India sometime between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE, traditionally dated to 528 BCE. This was a period of great social, political, and cultural upheaval, as increasing population density and the introduction of the iron plow hastened the transformation from a herding society to a more settled agricultural and increasingly urbanized society. Politically, there was a transformation from smaller groups ruled by clan chieftains to a mixture of expanding monarchies and more egalitarian city-states. On the religious landscape, there was a growing discontent with the Vedic traditions that understood that life was suffering, but seemed to offer no solution to the endless round of birth, death, and rebirth, cycles of samsara that seemed inescapable according to the doctrine of karma. Angst-filled religious seekers in this period would frequently become renouncers of worldly comforts. They would shave their heads and don saffron robes and wander in search of one or more spiritual teachers, known as yogis, in search of answers. These yogis and their followers often dwelled away from the urban centers in the forest and mountains, and espoused a variety of meditative and ascetic practices that were sometimes extreme. While the term hermit is often applied to these spiritual teachers and seekers, the term renouncer is probably more accurate, because they frequently traveled from town to town, where they would live for a period on the outskirts and preach their dharma to the local crowds. According to traditional accounts, around the age of 30, a young man named Siddhartha of the Kshatriya or warrior leader caste, who would become known as the Buddha, eschewed his privileged life and set forth on a spiritual quest as a renouncer. After 6 years of searching without satisfaction, he seated himself beneath the Bo or Bodhi tree, a sacred fig tree, on the outskirts of the town of Bodh Gaya, vowing to remain there until he achieved enlightenment. After many days had passed, he achieved enlightenment, and shortly after, he traveled for 5 weeks to a deer park in the town of Sarnath in search of a group of renouncers he knew who dwelled there. It was there he preached his first sutra to 5 of them, and who became his first disciples. In this first sutra, known loosely as Setting the Dharma Wheel in Motion, he revealed his truth to the world and set forth the fundamental teachings of what we now call Buddhism, the middle way between asceticism and worldly indulgence. He revealed the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path of how to achieve enlightenment. As word of the new teaching spread, a community of disciples and developed around the Buddha, and true to both the cultural tradition of renouncers and the inherent reverence for life in Buddhist teachings, the monks lived in the forest and caves in a simple fashion that we might call sustainable or eco-friendly in modern terms. For example, the early monks' code of conduct, called the Vinaya, contained, among other things, rules for a mostly vegetarian diet, prohibitions against the killing of forest animals, and rules to prevent the pollution of water with human waste. Living so close to nature heavily influenced the art and literature from this period and set a precedent for centuries to come. There are numerous passages in both the early Pali texts and later compilations of the sayings of Buddha that celebrate the beauty and intrinsic value and instructive value of all life, including non-sentient beings and even the stones and other inorganic elements. The Jataka tales are another source of Buddhist literature that is filled with nature imagery and stories that feature animals and plants in folkloric tales that provide moral instruction, similar to Aesop's fables, with which Western readers are more familiar. These collected stories are alleged to be accounts of some of the Buddha's numerous reincarnations, including 123 rebirths as an animal The natural world was revered by the early Buddhists for its own sake and as a refuge for individual spiritual growth. The contemplative nature of Buddhist practice has from the beginning valued the solitude that can be found in natural settings, the empty places of the wilderness. This is not surprising, since attraction to wild and even hostile environments is common among mystical and contemplative traditions. For a Buddhist, the cultivation of inner calmness and balance is vital, and a natural setting can facilitate the spiritual solace sought by the practitioner. From this contemplative practice comes a deeper understanding of the interdependence of life. But as His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said, the correct understanding of interdependence has more to do with maintaining the balance of the inner and the outer world, and with the purification of the inner world. In other words, it is insufficient from a Buddhist perspective to gain only an intellectual understanding of interdependence by time spent in nature. Rather, it is mostly a means of cultivating the inner world. This focus on individual enlightenment also means that Buddhist environmental ethics are rooted in a holistic worldview that stresses the interdependence of all beings and compassion, rather than in an overarching story of the origins and destiny of the natural world. In the early Buddhist texts, the Buddha was typically dismissive when asked questions about the origin of the world, and usually redirected the questioner to the here and now. Buddhist cosmology incorporated traditional Vedic mythology and a cyclical view of time with cycles of rebirth. But the major new teaching was that a viable means of ending the suffering was accessible to all. As time passed and different Buddhist sects emerged, a few of these sects, particularly Tantric Buddhism, did develop and emphasize more elaborate cosmologies. But the essential elements of these were still based on earlier Hindu and other local traditions. History shows that religions do not remain monolithic in the absence of their founding central figure, and almost immediately after the Buddha's death, disputes arose over what the founder said and what the founder meant by it. Buddhism did not remain a community of forest-dwelling monks, and new sects began to split over philosophical differences and about texts and rules and around new charismatic teachers. By 250 BCE, Buddhism was spreading into other parts of Southeast Asia and Central Asia, and by the time Christianity was developing in the Middle East, two of the major divisions of Buddhism were already distinct: Mahayana, which means the great vehicle, and Theravada, or teaching of the elders. As Buddhism continued to spread into China, Japan, and Tibet, aspects of each culture influenced the development of the tradition, as one might expect. In China, Buddhism flourished and exchanged ideas with Taoism and Confucianism until the year 845, when Emperor Wuzong labeled it an alien religion. Although Buddhism continued after the crackdown and the destruction of numerous monasteries and temples, it never recovered the momentum it had before. Of particular importance to green spirituality, the contributions of Taoism, with its concept of the ultimate source, the Tao, or the Way, together with a long tradition of nature veneration, had a profound influence on both the arts and philosophy of Chinese Buddhism. The poetry of Chinese Buddhist writers became filled with rich natural imagery and projected a sacred veneration of wild places. The Huayan school that emerged in the 4th century out of the Mahayana lineage is probably the best example of Taoist influence. Its namesake founder, Huayan, and his master, Daoan, developed a meditative practice that centered on ecstatic visions in order to glimpse the glory of Amitabha and the otherworldly Pure Land. The goal was to achieve unity with the ultimate source of all things, and an intuitive sense of the holistic, absolute interdependence of all things, not just sentient beings, was refined in the school to a high degree over the next few centuries. The idea of relational holism resonates well with the deep ecology philosophy of nature first articulated by the modern Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss. As Buddhism spread to Tibet and Japan, the major lineages were all represented, and schools unique to each culture emerged over time. Elaborate cosmologies based on pre-Buddhist mythology became a part of many Buddhist schools in Tibet. A popular Pure Land tradition emerged in both Tibet and Japan that emphasized prayer to Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light, with the promise of an ultimate destiny for humanity in a land described in the sutras as a beautiful garden with jewel trees of various scents from which bunches of flowers, leaves, and branches of all kinds hang down. In Japan, the influence of deep cultural appreciation for nature can easily be seen in the poetry and art of the Zen Buddhist schools. The Shinto tradition of venerating nature spirits became blended with the Buddhist traditions about the many incarnations of the bodhisattvas, those who postpone their own transcendence so they may assist others out of compassion. Today, the varieties of Buddhism are staggering, ranging from forms so heavily influenced by folk religions that they are hardly recognizable as being Buddhism, to deeply esoteric traditions and new Western forms that may end up more as a blend of Eastern and Western concepts. As environmental issues were brought up into the spotlight in the mid-20th century, groups within most faith traditions began to take notice and develop religious positions on green issues. For some, the position chosen was simply to ignore the issue or even deny the scientific evidence, and this continues today, sometimes for theological reasons. Others began to see these issues as so critical to human survival that most other concerns must take a back burner for the foreseeable future. With its focus on the enlightenment of the individual, Buddhism has often been criticized as being too inward-looking and insufficient in addressing real social justice work in the outer world. Two of the principal Buddhist teachers who have called for action on the environment are Thich Nhat Hanh and His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. In the 1960s, Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh was troubled by the carnage of the Vietnam War and called for what he termed engaged Buddhism in response. Although it was initially a response to war, his idea of engagement was motivated by the compassion he feels for all sentient beings, one of the ideals of Buddhism. And he has become very active in environmental issues in recent years. As a Buddhist, he sees the inner work of meditation and spiritual development as the means to empowering individuals to effect social change. As he said in an article from 2000, quote, "To practice mindfulness and to look deeply into the nature of things is to discover the true nature of interbeing. There we find peace and develop the strength to be in touch with everything. With this understanding, we can easily sustain the work of loving and caring for the earth and for each other for a long time," end quote. Although the Dalai Lama represents a very different lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, he echoes the sentiment from which Thich Nhat Hanh referred in what he calls the Bodhisattva ideal. The Dalai Lama teaches that Buddhists should center their practice on the idea of bodhicitta, which means the compassionate wish to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of others. And this includes caring for the planet. As part of the diaspora of Tibetans following the Chinese occupation of Tibet in 1950, the Dalai Lama has become a popular figure in the West, and many Americans in particular are learning about his teachings and his call for environmental activism. As the world struggles with ecological crises and environmental justice, the role of religious institutions and individuals engaging with the work is essential. Healing this fractured world depends on deepening the human understanding of interdependence with the web of life, deepening a green spirituality throughout the world's many religious traditions. I've only touched on a few examples of the rich sources from which Eastern traditions can draw inspiration, and I believe they have much to offer. In many cases, Eastern traditions are leading the way on issues such as the ethical treatment of animals and recognizing the kinship of all life. We in the West could do well to explore the ideas they offer, and I am thankful to be part of a tradition that encourages such exploration in the search for truth and meaning. I invite you to join in our closing hymn, number 350, The Ceaseless Flow of Endless Time. Our closing words are from the Sutta Nipata, part of the Pali Canon of Theravada Buddhism. In safety and in bliss, may all creatures be of a blissful heart. Whatever breathing beings there may be, frail or firm, long or big, short or small, seen or unseen, dwelling far or near, existing or yet seeking to exist, may all creatures be of a blissful heart.
Thank you. I'd like you to join me now for the extinguishing of our chalice. You'll find the words in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to join us afterwards for our social hour. It's going to be a few minutes between the end of the service and the beginning of social hour, so please be patient with us. And it's going to be about 10 or 15 minutes, but don't wander away. Please join us. We'd love to see you and talk with you. Right now, please enjoy our postlude.